This is The Common Denominator, and I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. Welcome back to The Common Denominator. I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. It has been, as you might well imagine, an intense week since we last met, where the Islamic Republic of Iran did what many were skeptical that it would, and launched from their own soil an unprecedented attack upon the sovereign country of Israel. 170 suicide drones, 30 cruise missiles, and 120 ballistic missiles were said to have been launched after 10 panic-induced days where the threat of attack loomed and threatened at every moment. It was a surreal experience when reports finally confirmed the launch of the largest drone attack in history on its way to us, along with the timeline of their arrival. The events most immediately preceding this, from all points of view, historical assault, began on April 1st, when Israel allegedly assassinated a senior Iranian general, Mohammad Reza Zahedi, in a targeted strike to a building next to the Iranian embassy in Damascus. 2 senior members of Iran's IRGC were killed, along with 6 other officers, some likely from Iran's proxy army. Zahedi was said to have been heavily engaged in advancing Iran's destabilizing reach across the region, leading operations with the regime's proxies in Syria and Lebanon, and was one of the top figures facilitating support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who relies on Iran after 10 years of a civil war that has left Syria war-torn and fractured. He was said to be close to the Ayatollah and involved in the planning and executing of Hamas's attack on October 7th. Khamenei vowed his revenge. For almost 2 weeks, there was near constant speculation surrounding an Iranian attack and whether it would use its proxies or act directly from its own soil, something few imagined they would do. As is well known, Iran has its eye on the prize of nuclear capabilities and races towards that goal. It was believed they would do little to risk it, but they did, and it shifted regional alliances in an instant. With it, too, comes the realization of Israel's vulnerability and missing deterrence, as it becomes clear, in a world before October 7th, this would never have happened. At midnight of the 14th, IDF Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari announced that Iran has launched a direct attack from Iranian soil towards the state of Israel. About an hour and a half later, it was confirmed that missiles had also been launched. Not long after, sirens across Israel began to blare. The US, UK, and France worked in near seamless cooperation with Israel to bring down 99% of incoming drones and missiles. It's reported that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates passed on intelligence of Iran's plans. Jordanian fighter planes are reported to have shot down dozens of drones within their airspace. This was an achievement of equally historical proportions, and while there are some too numbed by social media's influence to absorb it, the stories of personal and communal near misses, what many experience as open miracles, continue to come out, and it is with tremendous and genuine gratitude that I, along with each and every Israeli, thank the men and women who took to the air to save our Jewish hides Saturday night. To my Israeli brothers and sisters, to my fellow Americans, to the UK and France, and to the breaking light of hope with Jordan and Saudi Arabia, in this time of our greatest darkness, you have brought unexpected hope, and we pray it is quickly rooted, lest it spoil in the open air. The politicians politic, but it is you who have taken action. Iran, it must be said, did not respond to the assassination of its terrorist general. Iran has been murdering Israelis and sowing terror in the region for 45 years. They are responsible for October 7th and the assaults against Israel every day since. They fund Hezbollah, perhaps the most capable and dangerous terror organization in the world, who strikes at Israel daily and has displaced some 80,000 people from their homes in the north for nearly 7 months, and with no end in sight. Rather far from it. The Islamic Republic of Iran has committed countless and continuous acts of terrorism, regularly hunting down Israelis across the world while they venture to vacation abroad. In the unending irony of our history, just last week, a court in Argentina declared the Iranian regime to be behind the bombing of an Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, one that killed 22 people, and the bombing of a Jewish community center there as well in 1994 that murdered 85. This occurs all the while that Iranians, at least 80% of their 90 million population, if not more, cry out against the brutalization they face under the Ayatollahs. The Islamic Republic has ramped up its totalitarian authority recently, pursuing, openly beating, kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and sometimes murdering women for the insane reason of wearing improper hijab. The Iranian people make it known that they utterly reject this regime and their efforts to pull the region and the world with it into bloody-minded war. We understand well now what we could never have imagined at the time. October 7th was not an isolated event of devastation to the Israeli and Jewish people. It was instead the gunshot kickoff of frontal attack on Israel by the many who plotted, prepared, and planned in the years prior, while we accepted the illusion of uneasy quiet as a sign of intention. What happened Saturday night has been the subject of wide conjecture by the armchair, bold, and TikTok-trained public opinion. The denial of objective reality reaches another peak from the deeply confused masses. Instead of wide recognition of the world-changing events, Israel being the recipient has again launched evident and accessible shared reality into convoluted theory. I've read convictions that 350 missiles and UAVs weren't really intended to cause harm, that the missiles were unarmed, and that it was all coordinated with the U.S., aka the Big Satan, beforehand. I've read that launching over 300 missiles onto 9 million people was a necessary and somewhat proportionate response to Israel's targeted assassination of the IRGC general. And my personal favorite, that it's a win that no one was blown to bits. So let's hush up and carry on to maintain the deception of a tense and temporary quiet. While there is little doubt that Iran has tools of destruction even more lethal than what was delivered to Israel Saturday night, just as Hezbollah, this was indeed a strike designed, implemented, and executed to produce mass casualties and destruction, the only way 300-plus missiles could be interpreted. It's telling that it needs to be stated, but there you go. This was an act of war by the Iranian terrorist regime, and it was a test with lessons learned all around. A test of Israel's defense capabilities, a test of Israel's alliances, and a test of who is not aligned. It was a violation of Jordanian airspace for one, a middle finger to Biden's don't for another, and it showed that Israel has lost the deterrence it requires to live in a sea of hostility, violence, and aggression all around it. It makes clear to our leaderships in the West what they ought to have known long before. Appeasement didn't work. It never has, and it never will. In the Middle East, you need to play by Middle Eastern rules, or you just might lose your head. On a deeply personal note, and because of the distortion of reality that is so deeply abhorrent, I say this. I live between two important Air Force bases in the Negev. Just 10 miles from the Nevatim base that has been in the news as it was the target and reception of the brunt of Saturday's assault, and 13 miles from Hatzerim Air Base. Since October 2023, I have heard many myriad of aircraft flying overhead and at all hours. Those military personnel are stationed all around, and we have lived in real time the tension of war without respite. I experienced the heightened danger on October 7th first, and twice again in incidences of extreme gunfire near my village, which we have described in a previous episode. And I felt it again in the days leading up to April 14th. An acute danger that has changed my perspective on life. I share this with you because the media is deceptive, and everyone knows it now. We are lied to with a cynical psychological warfare that toys with the reality we once shared, and our perception of objective fact has eroded dangerously. Despite these manipulations, what we describe is no hyped-up fear of a potentiality that might one day come to pass. This danger is real. It has a name, and it has a mission, and it takes aim at me, my loved ones, and the country which roots me and gives me purpose, all while sitting in the bullseye of the planet. I am a person of sane witness, and I'm here to tell you what I see. We can still access reality because we live it, and because it stares us in the face, if we are only brave enough to look. The cooperation to protect Israel on Saturday against the Islamic regime's assault was an act of democratic alliance for which we say thank you. God bless America, and more of it, please. It is, however, impossible not to recognize that the Biden administration's rhetoric in recent months, from about the time of Biden's State of the Union, has directly weakened Israel's stance in the region. Their words that amplified the blatant propaganda of Hamas and Iran's talking points emboldened Israel's many and bloody-minded enemies. It has called into question Israel's position with its Western alliances, prompting headlines like in Forbes' lonely flag shot with Israel alone as its title. And their meaning was taken by the Israeli people for one, and by her enemies no less. Nadav Eyal, a journalist for Yediot, presented the question clearly. What is U.S. policy to deal with Iran? They push normalization in the region, and great, delighted, fingers crossed. But what is their plan when inevitable attempts to derail that normalization occur? The Biden administration, in 4 years' time, still has yet to decide. Where they show weakness, enemies of freedom do not hesitate to act. If we do not organize and act preemptively, if it could even be said to still be a pre, then we will be left without choice but defend a tiny country of 9 million against forces joined up against it. There can be no ambiguity among bullies. They speak the language of strength. When will the West accept this? Democracies desire peace, and this is precisely why tyrants give us no rest. As for Israel, it has quite literally no choice but to respond to the Iranian regime's attack. And of the unending, impossible choices we, the people of Israel, face, and we've enumerated here week after week, this would be the mother of them all. For all the bandages stuck on the dam of violence, the brilliant defense systems invented, the avoidance and appeasing, the surveillance and the security to avoid everyone's greatest fear, a full frontal war with Iran and the initiation of its proxies across the region, has still arrived to us now because of a secondary line of defense which could never replace a definitive offensive one. There are no tunnels through this rock and hard place. If Israel acts in response, then it may indeed kick off a regional war. Israel faces battle on fronts between Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, proxies in Iraq, Syria, Yemen all around, and the multiple thousands of heavily armed, more so than ever before thanks to Iran, terrorists boiling and raging inside the heart of Israel. It is a terrifying proposition, and yet avoidance has only allowed it to strengthen. This is the time to act now. As much as I will admit there is nothing I fear more, but to leave it until tomorrow ensures their weapons and will may tip the scales in their favor for the long term. It may pull the region into war, and maybe the whole world. And so, shamefully, Western leaders rush again and again to damper down Israel's offensive defense, the only one they influence, and the only one that ensures further violence. Israel has no choice. We are a nation of refugees, and we have nowhere else to go. We will fight with all we have, for we do not defend a philosophical idea in a faraway country. We defend our precious children, homes, and land, and we have no illusions about for what we fight and why we must. The other option is that Israel does nothing, perhaps only a symbolic response. They succumb to the will of the U.S. election season and weak-kneed leaders whose people have no taste for the brutality of the Middle Eastern heathens, even as those entities change the landscape of the West's own neighborhoods. If this is the option Israel's leadership takes, then violence is 100% guaranteed. These are the choices on the table, and there is no in-between. What Israel will choose, we don't yet know. We pray that the leadership who has brought us to this brink somehow and against all odds and logic, be guided to choose wisely now. What is crystal clear and repeated by every eye that can see is that deterrence needs to be reestablished now and with crystal clarity. To deter a parasitic bully from acting on its brutal will is to show strength so great in a response so stinging to their brazen acts of violence that they never raise their hand to that fire again. Israel needs to reestablish its neighborhood deterrence, and America, the world's democratic safeguard, must do so no less. It's possible that Israel will wait. There are several advantages to this. While Iran stews in its own fear of retaliation, there is much for Israel to consider of where and when and how. It's believed that we will pursue diplomatic options. The hope of emerging with new alliances in the Middle East is a potential we hope tomorrow will be a reality. If waiting is indeed the government's decision, it will give Israelis a brief respite from the relentless and agonizing 6 months of war, one that even as we weary, we understand has only just begun. We might have a Passover where our Simchat Torah was stolen. Maybe it will be a last hurrah, and maybe a calm before the storm. But the month of Nisan and holiday of Passover is the time of our redemption. It is the time when God stepped in and intervened in nature on our behalf. The Jews of the world might utilize this time to call upon God to make miracles for us once again. For while we surely cannot be said to merit miracles, we can say that for thousands of years we have clung to our nationhood, our land, and our potential. In this world of deepening distortion, I believe that matters a great deal. I want to live in peace. All 9 million of us desire this with every fiber of our being. To live totally mundane lives where we strive to raise healthy children, realize our purpose, and have a few weeks off for vacation every now and then. We have proven our willingness to compromise what means so much to our people time and again, if only we might be left alone to realize our dream of self-determination. This body of people of who I am part, who neither conquers nor converts, has desired as a nation without pause, without diversion or confusion for nearly 4,000 years to actualize a living Judaism that we only and ever can in this land of our ancestors. Only those who have faced death can tell you how much they cling to life. Only those who have seen up close the intention of destructive forces will understand why it must be fought with all we have, and as soon as we can, with clear and bold strength. I would live another 100 years pretending along with a quiet that would allow me. It is the nature of bullies that they want to take what you have, and no pleading to leave well enough alone will convince. October 7th showed us that we have reached maximum capacity for this pretense. And now the gig is up. Their purpose is to terrorize us, to make our lives so terrifying and unlivable that we abandon our ancestral land, this place of our hope and our refuge. But they believe their own lies and misjudge who we are, to their own downfall. The chance of grabbing hold of the roots of what made our West a refuge will be entirely up to us to save, and we will likely end up fighting for it from our respective corners. It's okay if that's frightening. Courage only comes when you realize the danger you face and push forth still. It is in God alone we trust. Will we be those whom God can trust in return? I wish for us the best of who we can be. I cannot decide how I will die, but it becomes clear, finally, that I can decide how I will live. I've long noted how Israelis are masters of living in the moment, dropping backpacks to dance and break into song at any opportunity that arises. Seems I am finally Israeli myself. Israel shares with her neighbors the temerity of life, at how quickly our world can change. But she is different, for in that temerity, our love for life is not diminished. The opposite is instead true. We choose to love every moment we can catch. We'll see you next week, God willing, on the Common Denominator.